The event horizon hung suspended against the black, its floodlights barely piercing the void as alarms wailed through the corridors. Dr. Elias Kane's fingers trembled over the control panel, his team's nervous breaths fogging up their visors. "Remember why we're here," he muttered, voice cutting through the static. "This will either redefine physics or tear us apart." The countdown beeped once, a final heartbeat before the containment field engaged. Then light, not the sterile glow of their screens, but something alive, writhing, as the black hole's edge twisted toward them like a mouth. The ship groaned, metal screaming as unseen forces clawed at its hull. One of the engineers shouted, but the sound ripped away into the sudden vacuum of power failure. The last thing Kane saw before the darkness swallowed them whole was the readings spiking off the charts. Something was answering back. And it wasn't human. The containment field shattered with a sound like breaking glass, except no shards flew, only an impossible silence as the micro-singularity tore free. In an instant, Deck 4 vanished, steel and screams collapsing inward as if the ship itself had gasped. Commander Voss's voice roared through the comms, sharp with panic barely held in check. "All hands fall back to secondary stations, seal bulkheads 14 through 20. But the orders came too late. The black hole's hunger didn't stop at metal, it gnawed at the air, the light, even the seconds ticking on their wrist displays. Kane's hands moved in slow motion, every adjustment to the controls fighting against the tide of warped time. The numbers on his screen stretched and blurred, physics unraveling at the edges. Across the room, Ensign Rhea Patel reached for a handhold, her arm elongating like taffy, fingers dissolving into streaks of smeared color. Reality wasn't just bending. It was screaming, and in the heart of the distortion, something pulsed. Not a shadow, not a void, but a presence, vast and knowing, pressing back against their fragile human attempts to cage it. The last thing Kane registered before the deck pitched violently was the scent of ozone and something older, sharper, like the air before lightning strikes. Only this wasn't weather. This was the universe itself tearing open. The ship's AI stuttered mid-sentence, Lieutenant Carrie Holloway's voice repeating her last command in a jagged loop, warped and stretched like a damaged recording. The main display flickered, not with static but with faces. Dr. Kane saw his daughter's birthday party from 3 years ago, the candles burning too slow, the laughter stretched into a low, distorted wail. Across the room, Engineer Soto clutched his console as the screen flashed scenes from his childhood in Kyoto, cherry blossoms falling upward, his mother's voice backwards, syllables scattering like dropped coins. "This isn't a system failure," he breathed, fingers digging into the metal. "It's time itself coming apart." The ship shuddered again, not from impact but as if the universe had missed a step. Patel's monitor showed their oxygen levels ticking down, except the numbers jumped erratically, sometimes increasing, as though causality had started bleeding. The black hole's pull wasn't just crushing the ship, it was gnawing at the threads of sequence, stitching moments into a tangled knot. The hull groaned, a sound too deep for human ears, resonating in their bones. Somewhere in the dissonance, Kane thought he heard whispers, not in any language, but in the spaces between words, as if the void were trying to speak in the grammar of broken time. Soto wiped sweat from his brow, watching a drop hover midair, then split into 2, then 3, each droplet reflecting a different fractured second of the room. "We're not just in danger," he whispered, "we're unraveling." The lights flared once, not bright but wrong, a color none of them could name before the darkness swallowed them again. This time it wasn't empty, this time it was watching. The bridge lights flickered once, then died completely, plunging the command deck into an unnatural twilight. The only illumination came from the emergency strips along the floor, casting long, trembling shadows across the crew's faces. Then, between one breath and the next, the air thickened. Kane's skin prickled, the fine hairs on his arms rising as though charged with static. A whisper of cold brushed the back of his neck, and when he turned, she was there. Lieutenant Mara Velez, her uniform crisp and clean, stood at the navigation console. Impossible, because Velez had died 17 hours ago in the initial breach. Her body ripped into the void when the singularity first escaped containment. Her lips moved, but no sound came out, just empty, shuddering silence. Then, like a radio tuning into a signal, her voice crackled through, not from the comms, but from everywhere at once, as if the ship itself was speaking. "It's not just ours," she said, her pupils dilated black, her fingers translucent. "The collapse is happening across every axis, every version of us." Kane's breath caught. He'd theorized about temporal echoes, fragments of other timelines bleeding through the event horizon, but this wasn't a ripple. This was a hand reaching back from the grave. Velez staggered, her form flickering like a failing hologram. The coordinates, her hand passed through the console, scattering pixels like sand. "You have to," then the scream, not hers, not human. A sound like metal shearing, like planets cracking, and Velez dissolved into streaks of light, leaving behind only a string of numbers burned into Kane's retinas. The bridge erupted into chaos, but Kane barely heard it. The numbers weren't random. They matched a deep spaceboy marker, one listed in the archives as lost a century ago. And beneath the digits, pulsing faintly in the afterimage, was a single word, scrawled in a handwriting he'd know anywhere, his own. The distress signal pulsed through the speakers, not the sharp, digital burst of standard comms, but a slow, liquid rhythm like a heartbeat underwater. Every few seconds, the same four-note sequence repeated, just out of sync with the ship's own failing systems. Commander Voss slammed a fist on the armrest of his chair. "That's no derelict. Nothing survives that close to the horizon. It's a trick, a glitch in the interference." But Kane was already tracing the signal's origin on the main display, his breath catching as the coordinates resolved. The source wasn't just near the event horizon. It was moving against the pull. The screen flickered again, this time resolving into a grainy visual feed, a ship, or what was left of one. Its hull was half gone, peeled back like skin, but the remaining structure pulsed with an eerie bioluminescence, veins of blue light threading through the wreckage. "That's the Artemis," whispered Ensign Patel, her voice hollow. "Went missing 6 months ago near the Cygnus sector." Kane's fingers tightened around the edge of the console. The Artemis had been a research vessel just like theirs, same size, same mission profile. And now here it was, impossibly intact, drifting just beyond the point of no return. The signal shifted abruptly, the four-note sequence dissolving into a voice not recorded, not synthesized, but ragged, human. "Don't look directly at it," the voice gasped. "It learns from your eyes," then static, then worse, laughter, low, wet, choking. Not one voice now, but dozens, overlapping, warped by time dilation into a chorus of whispers. Voss recoiled, shut it off now, but Kane was already reaching for the comms, his other hand flying over the navigation controls. "We're going in." The deck tilted as the event horizon banked hard, alarms shrieking protests. Somewhere in the chaos, the signal looped again, the voice clearer this time, closer and unmistakably familiar. Kane's own. "It's not a warning," it said softly. "It's an invitation." Then the lights failed, and the only sound left was the black hole itself, a hum so deep it vibrated in their teeth, in their bones. The kind of sound you feel, not hear, the kind that doesn't stop, even after the speakers cut out. Even after you pray for silence. Medical officer Ray's scream cut through the chaos like a knife. Raw, guttural, the kind of sound that bypasses the ears and lodges straight into the spine. One moment he was gripping the med scanner, the next he was on his knees, fingers clawing at his temples as if trying to rip something out. They're everywhere. He choked, blood flecking his lips from bitten-through flesh. "The eyes, don't you see them? In the walls, in the..." His voice shattered into a seizure, body convulsing so violently 2 crewmen couldn't hold him down. Across the room, Ensign Patel's monitor flickered with Ray's vitals, then dissolved into static, except the static wasn't random. It swirled, coalescing into dark, pupil-less shapes that seemed to blink in unison. Kane lunged for the panel, but the ship lurched, throwing him into the console. The lights winked out, emergency power stuttering as the event horizon listed sideways, engines groaning like a dying animal. Somewhere in the blackness, laughter bubbled up, not from the comms, not from any human throat, but from the air itself, wet and jagged. Patel's flashlight speared the dark, revealing Ray's now limp on the floor, and sitting up beside him, a second Ray's, identical down to the sweat on his brow, except his smile stretched too wide, lips splitting at the corners. "You're not looking hard enough," the double whispered just as the flashlight died. When power surged back seconds later, both bodies were gone. Only a smeared trail of blood leading toward the airlock and the distant, rhythmic thud of something knocking from the other side. Not a fist, too many knuckles, too many joints. The air tasted wrong, too clean, too still, like the ship had never known sweat or panic. Kane groaned as consciousness returned, his fingers pressing against the cold floor of what should have been a ruined corridor. But the walls were pristine, the emergency lights flickering a steady, untroubled green. No alarms, no groaning metal, just silence thick and heavy as a held breath. He staggered upright, his reflection catching in a polished bulkhead, and freezing mid-motion. The man in the glass didn't mirror him. It tilted its head, lips parting in a smile too wide, too knowing, before the surface rippled like water and the image dissolved into static. A choked gasp echoed behind him. Patel stood a few feet away, her uniform immaculate, her face bloodless. "This isn't our ship," she whispered, "or it is, but—" Her voice trailed off as she pointed to the wall-mounted mission log. The display glowed with yesterday's date, the last entry looping a 3-second audio clip in Kane's own voice, ragged with fear. "Do not trust the reflections." The words hung in the air, sharp as a blade. Then the intercom crackled to life, and every hair on Kane's neck stood rigid. His own voice, calm, conversational, spread through the speakers. "Deck 3, Dr. Kane, you'll want to see this." The comms hissed and died. Patel's hand found his arm, her grip trembling. "We didn't send that," she breathed. Kane's mouth went dry. He knew every corridor, every console, but the ship hummed differently now. A low, pulsing rhythm beneath the metal, like a second heartbeat. The lights dimmed as they turned the corner, revealing a figure waiting at the end of the hall. Backlit by the glow of an untouched control panel, the silhouette was unmistakable. His own posture, his own stance, the doppelganger raised its head slowly, and when the emergency lights flared back to life, Kane saw its eyes, not the shattered mirror of a reflection, but something worse. Pupils blown black, swallowing the light, and behind them a hunger, not for flesh, not for blood, for the moments that made him. The thing wearing his face took a step forward, its smile never reaching those endless eyes. "Took you long enough," it said, voice smooth as polished glass. "We've been waiting." The duplicate Kane didn't move, not in the usual way. Its steps were fluid, seamless, as if gliding through frames of reality the way a hand passes through smoke. "You still don't understand," it said, voice layered with something beneath the words, a resonance like distant thunder. "This isn't a malfunction, it's a reflection." Every choice, every moment, the black hole folded them all into this. It gestured to the ship around them, the two clean walls, the hum of unseen machinery. Patel's breath hitched, a quantum echo, she murmured, fingers brushing the bulkhead. Like light trapped between mirrors, the duplicate's smile tightened. "Deeper than that, every time you tried to control the experiment, you spun off another thread, another version of the event horizon, another." Its gaze flickered to Kane's hands, still smudged with grease from the real ship's dying systems. "Another us." The air between them thickened, charged with the scent of ozone and something metallic like old blood. Then the duplicate lunged, not for Kane, but for Patel, its fingers elongating, joints bending wrong, just as the corridor behind them split open with a sound like tearing fabric. Another Kane erupted from the rupture, his uniform shredded, one eye swollen shut, roaring a warning that dissolved into static. The two duplicates collided midair, limbs blurring, merging for one horrific second before recoiling like repelling magnets. The first duplicate twisted toward the real Kane, its face flickering through a dozen expressions: rage, terror, something like pity. "You have to collapse the experiment," it hissed. "The core, override the safeties, or we'll all be stuck here, unraveling forever." A cold weight settled in Kane's gut. He knew the truth before the words finished. To collapse the experiment meant destroying the ship, the crew, everything. Behind him, the second duplicate writhed on the floor, its form shuddering between solid and static, its mouth stretched wide in a silent scream. Then it spoke, not in Kane's voice, but in the black holes, a sound like galaxies grinding together. Too late, the lights failed, the walls breathed. And from the darkness, 1,000 whispering versions of his own name began to call. The lights flickered back on to reveal chaos. Commander Voss had Sato pinned against the bulkhead, sidearm pressed to his temple, both men shaking with equal parts terror and rage. "You blinked wrong," Voss snarled, his pupils dilated black. 3 times in succession, just like the others, Sato's fingers scrabbled against the wall, his breath coming in ragged gasps. Behind them, Lieutenant Chen backed away, her hands raised toward what should have been an emergency fire axe, except the mount now cradled a twisted, vein-like mass of obsidian tendrils, twitching as if sensing the confrontation. Then the scream, not from Sato but from the ship itself, a metallic shriek that warped into something almost vocal, syllables buried in the noise. The sound drilled into their skulls, and for one fractured second, Kane saw it. Voss's reflection in the polished floor didn't match his movements. The mirrored Voss was smiling. Sato seized the distraction, twisting free as the organic device in the weapon mount pulsed once, emitting a low, wet thump like a heartbeat. The sound echoed through the corridor, and suddenly every crewman within 20 feet recoiled, clutching their own wrists. Beneath their sleeves, their pulse trackers had melted into identical pulsing masses, tendrils threading under their skin. Voss looked down at his arm in horror, his sidearm clattering to the deck, except it wasn't metal anymore. The grip had become flesh, warm and yielding, the barrel splitting open like a segmented mouth. "Whoever you are," Chen whispered, backing toward the emergency hatch, "you're not Voss." The commander turned, his expression cycling through confusion, fury, then something worse, recognition. Because Chen was right, the real Voss had been left-handed, this one wasn't. The realization hung in the air for half a breath before the walls groaned and the emergency lights died again. In the dark, something moved, too many limbs, too few joints, and the last thing Kane heard before the lockdown sirens wailed was Sato's voice, eerily calm. "It doesn't matter who's real anymore, it just matters who's left." Voss's scream cut short, not in silence but in something worse, a whisper. The black tendrils from the device slithered up her arm, burrowing into veins like roots seeking water. Her pupils dilated until no white remained, her irises swallowed whole by the void. The voice wasn't external. It vibrated through her bones, through the ship's hull, a soundless pressure in the skull that formed words anyway. "You sought to control the abyss, now it controls you." Her fingers twitched, then spasmed, the joints cracking as they elongated, fingertips splitting open to reveal glistening filaments that pulsed in time with the ship's failing lights. Chen backpedaled, her boots slipping in the slick, dark fluid now seeping from the walls. "Voss, look at me, fight it," but the woman who turned toward her wasn't Voss anymore. The thing wearing her face tilted its head, a grotesque mimicry of curiosity, lips parting to reveal teeth that had sharpened into needlepoints. When it spoke, the voice was layered, Voss's tenor frayed at the edges, undercut by something older, hungrier. "Fight," it laughed, the sound warping like a corrupted audio file. "Why would I fight the only thing that finally understands?" The ship shuddered, a convulsion that knocked Chen to her knees. Overhead, the emergency strips flickered, their glow replaced by a bioluminescent sheen, the same eerie blue radiating from Voss's veins. The tendrils in her arm branched outward, weaving into the bulkhead, stitching her to the event horizon itself. Kane watched in horror as the metal around her writhed, panels peeling back to expose throbbing, organic circuitry beneath. Not an infection, a conversion. Patel grabbed Kane's arm, her nails biting into his skin. The core. It's not just rewriting the ship, it's rewriting us. Her voice broke as she held up her own wrist. Tiny black veins spiderwebbed beneath her skin, creeping toward her pulse point. The realization hit like a solar flare. Whatever spoke through Voss wasn't just in her. It was in the air, in the walls, in the very seconds unraveling around them. Voss, or what was left of her, took a step forward. The motion was wrong. Her legs moved, but the shadows moved faster, stretching ahead of her like grasping hands. You wanted to see beyond the event horizon. The entity mused, though its mouth didn't sync with the words. Now you will. The overhead lights shattered, and in the darkness 1,000 eyes opened. Not on the walls, in them, glowing, waiting. The last thing Kane heard before the screaming started was the ship itself breathing. The control panel flickered like a dying star, its readouts scrambled into gibberish except for the self-destruct sequence. The words glared back at Kane, pulsing red, one command, one keystroke. It would shred the event horizon's core inside the anomaly, collapsing the quantum echoes like a house of cards in a hurricane. Behind him, Ray slammed a fist against the wall, his veins now threaded with the same creeping darkness as Voss. You're signing our death warrants. He shouted, spittle flying. Not echoes, not reflections, us. But his voice fractured mid-sentence, the syllables stuttering as his left eye dilated black, identical to Voss's. The entity wearing Voss's skin laughed, the sound wet and layered too many voices in one throat. Death, you keep thinking in lines. She flexed her fingers and the shadows around her writhed, forming and dissolving faces, crew members Kane recognized from the mission roster. Some were alive, some had died hours ago, all here flickering in the dark like embers. Out there, she whispered, gesturing to the void beyond the ship, time's a river. Here it's an ocean, drown in it or ride the current. Her grin split too wide, teeth sharp as shrapnel. Your choice. Kane's hand hovered over the panel. The math was clear. Detonating inside the anomaly might seal the rift, or it might scatter them across eternity, each moment of their lives unraveling into infinite duplicates. Patel's fingers closed around his wrist, her skin fever hot. They're not lying, she murmured. I can feel it, the other versions, the ones who pressed the button. The ones who didn't, her breath hitched, the ones where we win. A shudder ran through the deck, not the ship, but reality itself, a tremor in the fabric of now. The walls peeled back like burned film, revealing glimpses of other corridors, other Kanes, other endings. One version of himself screamed silently, his body dissolving into static. Another stood triumphant, bathed in eerie light. A third simply watched, eyes hollow with knowledge no human skull should hold. Ray's lunged, his corrupted arm lashing out, not toward Kane but the console. I won't be erased. The words barely sounded human. Kane moved faster, shoving him back just as the overhead lights failed again. In the dark, Voss's voice slithered from every direction at once. Tick-tock, Doctor, the longer you wait, the more of you there are to lose. Then the choice crystallized, brutal and bright, oblivion or infinity in fragments. Kane exhaled, his thumb found the key, and the universe held its breath. Sato's fingers flew over the core's emergency panel, bypassing safeties with the practiced ease of someone who'd mapped every circuit in the dark. The glow from the overload sequence painted her face in pulsing reds, her reflection flickering in the curved observation glass, not a single shadow where there should have been 3. 90 seconds, she called over the klaxons, voice steady as the deck plates buckled beneath them. You need to be past the secondary bulkhead before it hits. Kane gripped her shoulder, his palm registering the unnatural warmth radiating through her suit. The same darkness threading through Voss and Reyes had reached Sato hours ago. He'd seen the veins creeping up her neck when she thought no one was looking. Now it didn't matter. Her eyes when she met his were entirely human. "We're out of clean endings," she said softly. "This one's just cleaner than most." Behind them, Patel dragged a sobbing Chen toward the escape pod corridor, the younger engineer's wrists wrapped in shredded uniform cloth where her tracker had been. The ship groaned, a sound like a great beast waking, bulkheads warping as the anomaly's grip tightened. Sato didn't flinch. Her hands never stopped moving, rerouting power feeds with brutal efficiency. "Tell command something useful," she muttered, teeth flashing in a grin that didn't reach her eyes. Like how containment protocols failed, or how the core didn't just react to the black hole. A shudder ran through the deck and the overhead lights failed. In the emergency strobes, Kane saw the truth Sato hadn't voiced. The tendrils weren't invading the core, they were growing from it. The countdown hit 60 seconds. Sato jammed her access card into the manual override slot, the biometric lock flashing green despite the corruption snaking up her forearm. "Go," she ordered, and for the first time her voice wavered. Not with fear, with grief. "Before you see what happens next." Kane hesitated one heartbeat too long. The walls breathed inward, the air itself thickening with the scent of scorched metal and something organic like opened soil. Sato's reflection in the glass turned its head slow, deliberate, to stare at him with eyes that were no longer hers. "Tell Earth we pushed too far," she whispered, just as the alarms crescendoed into a single, deafening tone. The last thing Kane registered before the blast doors sealed was Sato's hand, human and steady, pressing the final command. Then light. Not the sterile glow of the ship's systems, but gold and terrible and alive, unfolding from the core like a flower made of flame. The explosion came silently at first, a brilliant, impossible expansion that swallowed the corridor whole before the sound caught up, a roar that shook the event horizon down to its bones. Kane didn't look back. Somewhere in the maelstrom, Sato was laughing or screaming, or both at once, her voice fraying into static as the universe itself took notes. The escape pod's hatch hissed shut just as the event horizon's spine snapped, the massive hull twisting like a dying serpent caught in the singularity's grip. Kane's hands trembled against the viewport as the pod thrusters fired, hurling them backward just ahead of the shockwave, a ripple in reality itself, folding the ship into a knot of molten metal and screaming light. For one impossible second, the black hole's event horizon stretched, then flickered like a dying screen, its dark surface peeling back to reveal nothing. No stars, no cosmic dust, only an endless obsidian plane studded with countless luminous points, each one dilating in unison as the pod tumbled past. Eyes, not the metaphor of distant galaxies or spectral anomalies, but unmistakably organic, wet, reflective, lidless. They tracked the escape pod's trajectory with predatory focus, their pupils shifting in patterns that made Kane's stomach lurch, not random but algorithmic. Calculating, Patel slammed against the restraints behind him, her breath ragged. "They're not just watching," she choked, pointing to the navigation panel. The display showed their trajectory arcing away from the void, except the numbers kept recalculating, always adjusting to the same endpoint, a slow, inevitable spiral back toward the eyes. The pod's thrusters roared at maximum burn, but the distance didn't increase, it just held as if space itself had become adhesive. Chen let out a shattered laugh from the co-pilot seat. "We never left the event horizon, did we?" Her fingers brushed the viewport, tracing the outline of a colossal iris now swelling to fill the entire frame. The black hole hadn't collapsed, it had blinked, and in that terrible darkness between heartbeats, Kane finally understood Sato's last words. The core explosion wasn't meant to destroy the anomaly. It was meant to wake it up. The air inside the escape pod grew thick with the sour tang of recycled oxygen and sweat, each breath feeling heavier than the last. Reyes clenched his fists against his knees, watching the numbers on the life support display tick downward with merciless precision, 37% remaining. Enough for hours, maybe, or not enough at all. His gaze drifted to Voss, slumped against the far bulkhead, her breathing shallow. The infection, if that's what it was, had spread beyond her veins. Patches of her skin had turned translucent, revealing the storm of darkness swirling beneath, pulsing in time with some unfathomable rhythm. Chen's voice cracked the silence like glass. "She's changing, not a question, a verdict." Voss stirred at the sound, her eyelids fluttering open. The whites of her eyes were gone, replaced by the same infinite black that had swallowed the event horizon. But when she spoke, her voice was jarringly clear, stripped of the layered distortion from before. "It's not pain," she murmured, flexing her fingers. The shadows beneath her skin coiled like living ink. "It's understanding." A shiver ran through her, not a convulsion, but something subtler, as if her very cells were realigning. The core didn't just collapse, it connected. Patel recoiled, her back pressing into the pod's curved wall. Connected to what? Outside the viewport, the void yawned, starless and depthless. Voss turned her head toward it with eerie precision, as if something out there had called her name. To the before, she whispered, and the after, to the parts of the universe that don't fit inside time. A thin, black tendril seeped from her nostril, questing like a worm sensing rain. Reyes lunged forward with a scrap of cloth, but it retracted before he could touch it, slipping back into her like a secret. The pod's comms crackled to life, a burst of static, then a voice, not from command, not even human. A series of clicks and whirs, rhythmic, almost musical, resolving into a single, looping phrase, "Return to the edge." Chen's hands flew to her ears, her face draining of color. "That's not the radio, that's inside my head." Voss smiled then, slow and knowing, as the darkness beneath her skin flared like a heartbeat. "Told you," she said softly. "It's learning our language." The pod's instruments whined in unison, every screen glitching to the same three words over and over in Kane's handwriting. "They're waiting." Dive deeper, and then the lights failed, plunging them into a blackness so complete it felt alive, breathing, watching. The only sound left was the drip of something wet hitting the floor, too thick for water, too slow for blood. Somewhere in the dark, Voss began to laugh. Voss's body arched violently, her spine bending at an impossible angle as the shadows beneath her skin erupted outward, not in tendrils but in perfect geometric shapes, tessellating the air with razor-edged darkness. Her jaw unhinged with a wet crack, but the scream that tore free wasn't hers. It was the black hole's voice, vibrating through their bones like the hum of a tuning fork pressed against the skull. Hypothesis confirmed. It intoned, each syllable syncopated, as if spoken by 100 mouths just out of phase. Organic observers collapse quantum states more efficiently than machines. "You were never the scientists, you were the specimens." Chen gagged as the scent of burnt copper filled the pod. Voss's capillaries rupturing en masse, her skin splitting like paper under the pressure of whatever was speaking through her. Blood didn't drip, it hovered in perfect spheres, each droplet reflecting not the pod's interior, but fragments of distorted memories. Kane as a child, Patel mid-laugh aboard the event horizon, Reyes bleeding out in a corridor that hadn't existed until now. The visions warped as the entity continued, its words slithering between past and present tense. "We measured your fear, catalogued your resilience, your ship was the Petri dish." The event horizon, Voss's remaining eye liquefied, black ooze spiraling into the air like ink in water. The microscope. Patel lunged for the emergency oxygen mask, her fingers brushing the release valve just as Voss's torso collapsed inward. Not imploding, unfolding. Her ribcage split like the petals of a grotesque flower, revealing not organs but a flickering tunnel of light, a snapshot of the event horizon's bridge, pristine and untouched, every console glowing green. In the center stood a figure with Voss's face, whole and unharmed, waving cheerfully before the vision snapped shut like a camera aperture. The pod's temperature plummeted. Frost spiderwebbed across the viewport, not from cold, but from the sheer absence of heat, as if the void outside had leaned in to breathe. Razor's tracker implant burst from his wrist in a spray of gore, the pulsing black mass elongating into a slender, jointless finger that pointed at Kane. "You still don't see," the entity sighed through Voss's dissolving vocal cords. "We didn't hijack your experiment, we answered it." Then the truth hit Kane like a plasma surge. The coordinates, the signal, the Artemis's wreck, all of it had been bait. Not to lure them in, but to trigger their protocols, their containment measures, their beautiful, predictable human desperation to control the unknown. The anomaly hadn't reacted to their science. It had shaped it, engineered it. The Event Horizon's core wasn't a failed experiment. It was the first successful trial in a study far older than humanity. Voss's remains dissolved into a swarm of black motes, swirling in the shape of a helix before surging into the air vents. The last thing she left behind wasn't a corpse, but a message scratched into the floor plates in perfect, looping script, as if written by a steady hand. Phase 2 begins now. Outside, the void blinked again, and this time something blinked back. The static hissed like a living thing, warping the words into something that didn't quite sound human. "Do not return." A pause, thick with interference. Then, worse, "You've brought it back with you." The transmission cut abruptly, leaving behind a silence so complete it pressed against Kane's eardrums. Patel's fingers froze over the comms panel, her breath shallow. "That wasn't command's encryption," she whispered. "That was Dr. Holloway's voice from before the core breach." Chen let out a broken laugh, pressing her palms to her temples. "It's in our heads. It's been in our heads the whole time." Her wrists were mottled with those same creeping black veins, pulsing in sync with the escape pod's failing lights. Outside the viewport, the void stretched infinite and watchful, but now Kane noticed the flickers. Not stars, not reflections, echoes, fragments of the Event Horizon repeating in endless variations. The ship whole, the ship shattered, the ship melting like wax. Ray staggered to his feet, his pupils dilated so wide his irises were nearly gone. "You feel it, don't you?" His voice was too calm, too measured. "The pull. Like something's rewriting you from the inside." He pressed a hand to the viewport, and for a heartbeat, the glass turned liquid beneath his fingers, showing not the void, but Earth, except the skies were wrong. Swirling, hungry, then the pod's computer chimed, cheerful as a morning alarm. "Decryption complete," it announced. The screen resolved into a single image, the Event Horizon's bridge pristine and empty, every console dark except one. The main display glowed with 3 words, scrawled in handwriting Kane recognized as his own. The same 3 words from every nightmare, every corrupted transmission, every reflection that had ever blinked back. "You are the door." The light surged once, twice before failing entirely. In the dark, something moved, not outside, not in the walls, between their heartbeats. Razor's whispers started soft, barely audible over the pod's rattling life support, just nonsense syllables at first, the kind of delirium you'd expect from shock. Then the cadence shifted. The sounds folded into each other too precisely, consonants clicking like a language built for throats that weren't human. Kane caught the pattern 3 words in. It wasn't random. It was counting backward. Chen backed away until her spine hit the bulkhead, her fingers digging into the seams of the wall panels. "That's not any dialect I've heard." "That's not." Her voice died as Razor's head snapped up, her pupils swallowing her irises whole, black expanding until no white remained. Her lips kept moving, but now the words vibrated, layered with something beneath them, a harmonics that made the fillings in Kane's teeth ache. The medkit's sedative injector felt flimsy in his grip, like a toy pressed against the weight of whatever spoke through Ray's. He jammed it into her neck anyway. Her wrist whipped up, fingers clamping around his forearm with strength that shouldn't exist, not in a woman half-starved and bleeding from ruptured capillaries. For one endless second, her grip burned hotter than fever, searing through his sleeve. Then the sedative hit, and she collapsed, her final exhale shaping a word that left frost on the pod's floor. Silence until Patel hissed through her teeth, "Kane, look." The wall where Ray's had slumped was scarred now, not with scratches but with equations precise, elegant, the kind of math that belonged on a quantum theorist's chalkboard. Only these symbols pulsed faintly blue at the edges like bioluminescent ink. Kane reached out, and the moment his shadow crossed the first line, the numbers rearranged themselves. Not smearing, not melting, simply ceasing to be in one order and existing in another, as easily as a breath turning to steam in cold air. Chen made a sound like a sob caught in a vise. That's the cause containment algorithm, but the variables are wrong. The values are, her fingers hovered over a constantly shifting constant, a digit that refused to stay settled between 8 and 13. The pod's lights flickered. When they steadied, half the equations were gone, replaced by a single phrase, scrawled in Ray's handwriting but with a slant too sharp, too deliberate. "You're not solving it. You're feeding it." Outside, the void pressed closer, not in distance, in concept. The stars, or what they'd mistaken for stars, blinked in unison, and Ray's, limp on the floor, began to whisper again. In perfect unison. The rescue beacon's pulse should have been a relief, a steady, comforting rhythm cutting through the pod's silence. Instead, it set Kane's teeth on edge. The ship that slid into view wasn't one of Command's sleek, angular cruisers. It was the Artemis, its hull still half peeled open, veins of blue light threading through its wounds like sutures. The airlock cycled with a hiss, revealing 3 figures in pristine uniforms, their faces smooth as wax. No breath fogged their visors, no fingers twitched toward sidearms. They stood motionless until the tallest tilted its head a single mechanical jerk and spoke, not through the comms, through Kane's skull, "Come home." The words weren't audible. They unfolded behind his eyelids, etched in phosphorescent script. Patel gasped beside him, her hands flying to her temples as the figures stepped forward in perfect unison, their boots hitting the deck plates at the exact same instant. "It's waiting." Chen's scream cut through the haze, raw with recognition. "That's not the Artemis crew." She scrambled backward, pointing at the nearest figure's wrist. The insignia patch was fresh, the stitching crisp, but the name beneath it wasn't some long-lost engineer's. It was Patel's. The figures didn't react. They simply extended their hands in unison, palms upturned, fingers curling in a gesture that wasn't quite an invitation. More like a command. Kane's vision wavered, the pod's interior doubling for a heartbeat. 2 realities superimposed, one where he stood frozen, the other where he'd already taken that first, fatal step forward. The pod's emergency light chose that moment to strobe, painting the scene in jagged snapshots. The Artemis's corridor stretching behind the figures, too long, too wrong, walls pulsing like lungs. The rescue team's lips moving in perfect sync even when no sound came out. And their eyes, always their eyes, pupils blown so wide the irises were swallowed whole, reflecting not Kane's face but the void outside. A whisper leaked from the comms, static frayed but unmistakably Ray's voice, though Ray's hadn't moved from where he lay convulsing on the floor. "Don't look at their hands. They're not hands anymore." The figures took another step, the pod's temperature plummeted, and beneath their outstretched palms, the deck plates began to dissolve, not melting, not corroding, but simply ceasing to exist pixel by pixel, as if reality itself were being undone by their proximity. One of them smiled, not with its mouth, with its teeth. The console screen flickered under Kane's trembling fingers as he punched in the override codes, each keystroke echoing through the Artemis's dead quiet bridge. The logs unspooled in jagged fragments, crew manifests, engine diagnostics, then abruptly, a time-stamped footage file labeled Final Transmission Sol 3. The playback stuttered to life, revealing Earth's curvature, serene and blue, until the camera panned downward. Cities stood intact but empty, streets littered with abandoned vehicles, their doors hanging open as if the drivers had simply stepped out. Then the camera zoomed in on a park where hundreds stood motionless, necks craned upward, not in terror, not in prayer, in perfect, unnatural unison. Their eyes were wide, unblinking, pupils dilated black as the void between stars. The timestamp ticked forward 1 hour, then 2, and not a single person moved. Not a leaf stirred, even the wind had stilled, as if the planet itself were holding its breath. Patel's breath hitched. That's 2 weeks after our experiment began. Her finger traced the frozen faces on screen. They're not looking at the sky, they're looking through it. The footage jumped. Now the Earth's night side glowed faintly, not from city lights, but from millions of upturned eyes reflecting something vast and dark hovering where the moon should be. The image distorted, pixels bleeding into the shape of a familiar silhouette. The event horizon, suspended above the atmosphere like a spider over prey. Then static, then a single frame, clear as a knife wound, a close-up of Commander Voss's face, her mouth open in a scream that never made sound. Her irises were gone. In their place, twin event horizons swirled. Chen made a noise like a choked sob. We didn't bring it back with us, it brought us back to it. The screen went black. When it rebooted, the logs had rewritten themselves, the text scrolling in Kane's own handwriting. You thought you were running, you were always falling. Outside the viewport, the stars winked out one by one, as if something had taken a bite out of the sky. The controls hummed under Kane's palms, a faint vibration that seemed to pulse in time with the creeping dark veins now branching across his wrists. No more calculations, no more contingencies. The pod's navigation screen glowed with a single set of coordinates, the exact center of the anomaly where the event horizon had died. Patel's fingers trembled as she input the final course correction, her breath fogging the display. Even if we make it inside, she whispered, there's no coming back from that. Ray's laughter bubbled up from the corner, wet and guttural. His form barely resembled human anymore, limbs elongated, joints bending the wrong way, shadows pooling beneath his skin like ink in water. Back, his voice split into harmonics, layers of sound vibrating at frequencies that made the pod's metal groan. You still think in straight lines. One blackened finger uncurled toward the viewport where the void yawned, endless and watching. The source isn't a place, it's a question, and you're the answer. Chen slumped against the bulkhead, her ruined hands clutching a frayed emergency blanket. Blood, or something thicker, darker, seeped through the fabric where her tracker had been. We tried to cage it, she rasped, but cages have bars on both sides. Her gaze flicked to the pod's oxygen readout, the numbers now counting upward instead of down. A glitch or something far worse. Kane's thumb hovered over the ignition. The math was simple. If the anomaly had used them as conduits, as living portals to seep into reality, then cutting the connection required more than distance. It required annihilation, no debris, no signals, just the perfect, airless crush of the event horizon folding their atoms into nothingness. The pod's engines whined to life. Ray's leaned forward, his two wide grins splitting further, teeth sharp as shards of glass. Clever, he breathed though his lungs hadn't moved. But you forget, the comms crackled, spewing a burst of static that resolved into a voice none of them had heard in years. Kane's daughter, age 6, singing the lullaby he'd taught her before the mission. Clear as daylight, impossible. Ray's smile stretched until his cheeks split. The source remembers what you love. Kane punched the thrusters. The pod lurched forward, not toward the void, but into it, the darkness parting like a curtain to reveal 1,000 flickering event horizons, 1,000 Kanes, 1,000 ways this moment could unravel. The last thing he registered before the light failed was the console screen, now mirroring his own face back at him. His reflection winked. The pod's instruments screeched a final, discordant warning as they pierced the event horizon, not with the violent rending of metal Kane expected, but with a sigh like a door swinging shut in an empty house. Then the light bent not around them, through them. His body dissolved into streaks of color, his thoughts unraveling into half-remembered lullabies and equations, the boundaries between memory and matter erasing themselves one synaptic flicker at a time. Through the distortion, figures swam, not the Artemis's hollow crew, not the infected echoes of his team, but himself, 100 Kanes, 1,000, each seated at the same console, fingers hovering over the same ignition, faces locked in identical rictuses of resolve. Some pods veered left at the last second, some fired reverse thrusters, most like his own plunged forward, all crossed the threshold, all failed. The entity's voice arrived not as sound but as the absence of it, a vacuum where thought should be. A little clockmaker, it mused, syllables forming from the spaces between Kane's neurons. You keep carving arrows into a circle, a flicker. The pod's interior reassembled itself, or a version of it, every warning light dark, every screen pristine. Outside the viewport, the event horizon hung whole and unbroken, its floodlights scanning the void as if the experiment had never begun. On the comms, Sato's voice crackled, bright with false cheer. "Dr. Kane, you're cleared for approach." Another flicker. The pod was different now, smaller, older, its walls stenciled with mission patches from decades past. Through the glass, Earth's green and blue curve shimmered, whole and untouched. Patel's laughter rang out behind him, warm and real. "Wake up, sleepyhead." We're on final descent, one more flicker. The black hole yawned before him again, infinite Kane still cycling through their final moments. The entity's sigh vibrated through his ribs. The first humans to breach the horizon called it a mouth. The first to survive called it a mirror. You still haven't learned. The pod's hull groaned, the metal thinning, translucent as old parchment. Beyond it, something moved, vast, hungry. You were never the ones looking in. Kane's hand spasmed toward the controls. The other Kanes mirrored him. All of them, always. The pod's hull peeled away like old parchment, dissolving into swirling motes of light and shadow until there was nothing left but Kane. Not floating, not falling, simply existing in a space that refused to conform to the rules of up or down. Around him, the void pulsed, not with darkness but with something deeper, an absence so complete it gnawed at the edges of his vision, leaving afterimages of half-formed memories. His daughter's laughter, the scent of ozone before a storm, the crackle of the event horizon's calms in those last, lucid moments before the core breached. Then the whispers began, not sounds but the echoes of sounds vibrating through the marrow of his bones. "You named us singularity," the voice murmured, weaving through his synapses like a thread through cloth. As if we were a problem to solve, an equation to balance, the blackness before him shifted not into light but into a negative of it, a shape vast and shapeless, its edges fraying like ink in water. You measure, you dissect, you burn your little candles in the dark and call it science. Kane tried to speak, but his throat had unraveled somewhere between thought and sound. The entity drank his silence like wine. The others screamed. It mused. Voss begged. Reyes laughed. "But you keep thinking." A pressure bloomed behind his eyes, and suddenly he saw not with sight but with a sense older than optics. The event horizon wasn't destroyed. It was everywhere. 1,000 ships, 1,000 breaches, 1,000 Kanes unraveling in recursive loops, all feeding data back to this single hungry point. The revelation should have shattered him. Instead, it crystallized. The core wasn't a thing to be contained. It was a process, an appetite. Every experiment, every probe humanity had ever sent into the dark hadn't just observed the abyss, it had taught the abyss how to observe them. The darkness sighed, a sound like continents grinding. "Clever clockmaker, you finally understand." Tendrils of non-light coiled around him, not to crush, not to consume, but to show. Voss's face flickered past, not as a corpse but as a constant, her terror, her transformation, her whispered warnings all happening at once, eternal as a star. Sato's laugh echoed from a dozen throats, some human, some not. Patel's fingers clasped his in infinite variations, some warm, some cold, some dissolving into static mid-touch. "This is what mastery looks like," the voice breathed. "Not control, not dominance, communion." Kane's body, or the idea of it, trembled not with fear. With recognition. The equations cycling behind his eyelids weren't warnings, they were invitations. The singularity wasn't a predator, it was a mirror. And in its depths, something vast and ancient stared back. The pressure in Kane's skull sharpened into something almost tactile, like a blade of ice sliding between his synapses. The voice, if it could be called a voice, coalesced from the static, each word a vibration in the hollow of his bones. Little architect of broken symmetries, it sighed, the cadence shifting between reverence and mockery. "You stand at the threshold of all possible endings. Serve, and you will be the hand that knocks. Refuse." The void around him rippled, showing flickers of the pod, the Artemis, Earth's corpse-strewn cities, each image disintegrating like ash in wind. "And you become the door." Kane's lips moved before his mind caught up. "What if I refuse?" The question left him raw, stripped bare. Laughter spilled through the darkness, not as sound but as a series of fractures, tiny cracks spiderwebbing through his vision, each one leaking memories. His daughter's first steps replaying in reverse, the event horizon's final transmission, glitching into Sato's voice, whispering coordinates that hadn't existed yet. "You mistake the question," the entity crooned. "Acceptance isn't a moment, it's a vector." The fractures widened, revealing countless Kanes in countless pods, each making the same inevitable choice. Not now, not here, but always, somewhere in the weave. A cold finger traced his spine, not the entity's touch, but his own. The realization hit like a power surge. Every decision, every coded log, every desperate gamble had curled backward, feeding into this single, inescapable point. The experiment had never been about containing the anomaly. It had been about shaping him. The darkness pulsed, pleased. You calibrated the core to your fingerprints. You wrote the protocols in your own doubts. Even now you tremble, not from fear but recognition. A new image bloomed, Kane standing on Earth's surface, whole and unharmed, addressing a crowd of upturned faces. Their eyes were still human for now, herald or relic, the voice offered. The choice was always yours, you just hadn't finished making it. Outside the crumbling edges of his perception, the other Kanes reached for their controls. Some wept, some smiled, all of them in the end flew true. The lab's sterile lights burned Kane's retinas as he jolted upright, the scent of antiseptic and ozone flooding his nostrils. His hands smooth, unmarked by the black veins of the pod, gripped the edge of a familiar workstation. The event horizon schematics glowed on the monitor before him, untouched. Fresh, he knew this moment, the morning of the experiment's final briefing, hours before ignition. Across the room, Sato laughed at something Chen said, her coffee steaming in a mug that had shattered months ago. The mundanity of it clawed at his throat, then the reflection caught him. In the glass of the observation window, his own face stared back, but the eyes blinked a fraction too slow. The left corner of his mouth twitched upward, not a smirk, a rehearsal. The reflection's lips moved, whispering words his ears couldn't catch, but his ribs vibrated with their meaning. "This time you'll do it right." The door hissed open. Commander Voss strode in, her boots clicking against the floor, her hair pinned back in that tight bun he'd last seen unraveling into tendrils. "Cores primed," she said, tossing a datapad onto the table. "Final checks in 20. Her gaze flicked to the window, to Kane's reflection still hovering behind him, its fingers now pressed against the glass in a mockery of curiosity. She didn't react. Kane's stomach lurched. The lab wasn't a memory, it was a stage. Every face, every sound, every breath, a reconstruction so flawless it stank of desperation. The entity hadn't sent him back. It had folded him into a facsimile, a dry run for whatever came next. His fingers trembled as he reached for the datapad. The screen displayed the core's activation sequence, unchanged except for the timestamps, countdowns in negative values ticking upward from some unfathomable zero. A hand clamped his shoulder. Patel leaned in, her breath warm against his ear except her exhale carried the metallic tang of the void. "You always hesitate here," she murmured, too soft for the others to hear. Her thumb stroked his collarbone, a lover's gesture before her nails bit in, drawing blood. But not this time. Across the room, his reflection stepped through the glass. Kane's fingers closed around the containment device, except they weren't his fingers anymore. The joints bent wrong, the nails darkening to obsidian as the entities will course through him like a live wire. His lips parted, but the voice that spilled out wasn't human. It dripped with the weight of centuries, syllables curling like smoke. "Let's try this again properly." The lab dissolved, not in a blur, not in a fade, but in a brutal unraveling, every molecule of the false reality peeling back to reveal the truth beneath. The workstation, the schematics, even the scent of coffee twisted into filaments of light, woven into the shape of memories the entity had plucked from his skull. Voss's face cracked like porcelain, her smile lingering a second too long before shattering. Patel's grip on his shoulder melted into tendrils of static, her whispered threat dissolving into the hum of the void. And the core, oh God, the core hung before him, not as a machine but as a living thing. Its surfaces pulsed like a throat swallowing, its edges blurred where reality frayed around it. Data streams Kane had written himself flickered across its surface, but the numbers had changed, negative values, infinite loops, equations that described not containment but consumption. "You built the lock," the voice murmured through his stolen lips, "but you never asked what wanted out." Kane's body moved without him, hands dancing over the controls in a parody of his own meticulous patterns. The sequence wasn't the one he'd designed. It was something older, hungrier. The console screens reflected his face back at him, a dozen fractured Kanes, each mouthing the same words in perfect sync. Phase 2 begins now. Outside the observation window, the stars winked out one by one, not from distance, from attention. Something vast turned its gaze toward the event horizon, and in the silence between heartbeats, Kane understood. The experiment had never been his, the lab had never been real. The only thing that ever was the dark, and it was finally, patiently waking up. The view fractures like broken glass, each shard reflecting a different event horizon suspended in the grip of the void. Here, Sato still screams into a failing headset. There, Voss's corrupted body stitches itself into the ship's wiring. Another shard shows Patel's hands scrambling over controls that dissolve under her touch. The same moment, infinite and unraveling, playing out across the black hole's event horizon like a chorus of tragedies harmonizing in the dark, and beyond the chaos, through the thinning veil of space-time, Earth glimmers. Unmarked, unaware, a new ship gleams on a launch pad, its hull emblazoned with a name meant to inspire hope, the Event Horizon 2. Technicians bustle around the core chamber, calibrating containment fields with the same meticulous precision Kane once used. A young physicist, her hair tied back in the same tight bun Voss favored, adjusts her headset and grins at her team. "History starts today," she says, echoing words spoken 100 times across 100 realities. The countdown begins. 10, 9, 8. No one notices the static bleeding into their comms. No one sees the way shadows cling too long to the corners of the hangar. And when the core hums to life, its frequency a perfect match for the first ship's fatal pulse, the anomaly beyond the stars stirs, not awakening, not responding. Simply opening its eyes to the next iteration of an experiment it has already perfected. The camera lingers on the physicist's face for one endless second, her smile bright, untested, blissfully human before the screen distorts. A flicker, a glitch, and in the split second before the feed cuts out, her reflection in the observation glass winks.